I'm Tom Haley, and this is Bluegrass Region Voices and Views. My guest is Lexington-based illustrator, artist, writer, poet, photographer, dramatist, singer, pastor, and missionary, and amazing dad, Timothy Pack. I hope he's okay with that description. As humble as I find him to be, he might push back on it a little. This summer, he published a children's book which he wrote and illustrated named Skacky, Adventures in Imagination. An autistic child finds his voice. It's about the creative outlet his son Josiah developed that helped him communicate and interact with the world through his autism. Here's the description Timothy wrote. This book is dedicated to my son Josiah, whose imagination breathed life into his favorite toys. In choosing, naming, and animating his toys, an otherwise silent child found his voice. In a creative expression of caring, adventure, humor, and love, Josiah gives us a window into autism and shows us the value of belonging. In this conversation, we talk about autism, creativity, adventure, love, and living with purpose. We'll begin with getting to know about Timothy and his journey, and then talk about autism and the inspiring story of Josiah. Drop in on our conversation after I've asked Timothy to tell us where he was born and raised.
I was born in Covington, Kentucky. I was the third child of four, born to a Baptist minister and his wife, and they're from up in northern Kentucky, and we have family still in that area. And so, before I can remember, I was raised in that area, but my dad was a rural pastor, so we moved around quite a bit in the state of Kentucky, and we even went down to Florida for one of his pastorates. So I would say mostly I've been raised in rural Kentucky. In particular, when we landed in 1968 in Madison County, that is around Berea, Kentucky, that really became home. That's what that and Garrett County are home, and that's where I was raised.
Beautiful county. So your dad's still there?
No, my father's passed away. He passed away in 2008, and my mother 10 years before him in 1998.
And you live in Fayette County now?
We live in Fayette County.
Okay. So what is your first ever memory, going all the way back as far as you can?
That's a really good question. The one that leaps to my mind is I must have been nothing more than a toddler, and my siblings and I were playing on the swing set with Uncle Charlie. And Uncle Charlie was probably no more than 16 or 17 at that time. And he was showing us a good time, pushing us on the swing. And he was climbing around like a monkey on the swing set. And he got his pants caught into one of the bolts up top. And he fell off and it ripped his pants off. And we thought that was the most hilarious thing. And it still sticks in my mind. I must not have been, like I said, I must not have been any more than 4 years old. But I do remember that.
That is a great memory, yeah. Well, what was the first job that you ever had where you got paid, even if it was in candy bars or something?
I was in the early 70s. We lived in Campton, Kentucky, and my father pastored the church there. And so it was the first town that we actually lived in. Before that, we'd just been in rural areas. And so there were many yards there, and I got it in my mind that I would be an entrepreneur and have a lawn mowing business. So I walked down to the local hardware store and bought a lawnmower. I think I paid $40 for it, and I pushed it home. I bought it on credit, on installment. And then I went around and was a salesman, and I got myself a little corral of maybe 6 or 7 yards. And my biggest one was the church where my father pastored. And I got $7 for that, and it took me half the day on Saturday to mow that. But I was in high cotton because I brought money home, and during that time, I remember that I purchased a weight set. I started to lift weights. I bought a little black and white television set, so I got right into consumerism with my income. And so I became a gardener and a lawn mower, and that was the first thing that I can remember. Subsequent to that, then we lived in rural areas, and I worked in tobacco and hay for our local farmers. I remember the first time that I got paid by a farmer, I was paid $1.25 an hour.
Mm-hmm. And at what age were you again when you started the lawn care business?
I'm thinking I was 12.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Then I guess you grew up and you went on to college or had some experiences beyond grass cutting and working on farms. So tell us a bit about your university or college experience.
Well, I graduated from high school in Garrett County in Lancaster, Kentucky. And I was a rather confused young man in those early years, like many are. But I did go to Eastern Kentucky University directly after graduation, and I was an art major. That was my great passion. But I was so personally flawed, and there was so many challenges in my life that I only lasted at that about 6 weeks. And so I didn't continue with the art training. I ended up kind of batting around and trying to find myself, and eventually I moved to California in 1979.
What age?
Everything I owned in the back of my car. And
what age were you when you did
I was 21.
Okay.
Went to California, and there was family there. And I fell in with them, and that was really good because it gave me some opportunity. I worked in Los Angeles. I learned how to be a computer operator and a computer programmer while I was there. And then I started to go to night school at a community college. And eventually I took those credits and went to Azusa Pacific University, and I majored in Bible, and I graduated there summa cum laude in 1987.
Okay. What did you do with that degree then?
Well, that's a good question because I didn't initially know what to do with it because I had intended to go to Fuller Theological Seminary. I had been accepted there and looked forward to going because I was told by one of my professors that I would, how did he put it? I would sail through that experience. Unfortunately, what happened was that in that summer before I was to have begun at Fuller, our second-born son contracted meningitis and he passed away. Mm. And the emotional impact on myself and my wife was such that I was not prepared to start in seminary that fall. And so then by the time that the smoke cleared a year or two later, I didn't feel that was something that I was ready to do. And so since that time, in answer to your question, what did I do with that degree? I've struggled to find my place in the world, I suppose, because I was going to go to seminary, did not go to seminary, did not become a pastor as I expected I would, but rather took various jobs in the technology field. I worked for a time as an administrator in an accounting firm, but eventually moved back from California to Kentucky. I lived for a time to get my feet under me with my mother and father, and I decided that I wanted to try to see what it would be like to be an artist. Again, though I had no formal training in being an artist, it's something I'd always done. I'd always loved to draw and paint. So I'm self-taught in these things. And so now I undertook to teach myself how to become a commercial artist. And so I bought myself a computer. I learned how to do computer illustration, how to do color correction with Photoshop, how to use layout programs, and eventually got jobs in those fields and pre-media for press work. I did that kind of stuff. And so what's emerging clearly is my vocation has ebbed and flowed and taken on various personalities because I've done a number of things. Mm-hmm.
And I think I saw in some writing about you that I ran across online that you have been involved with pastoral care and missionary
Yes.
chaplaincy, and I don't know what that means.
Okay. Yes. So even though I did not go into the pastorate, I found that in the churches where I would go, I naturally gravitated to leadership positions. I would be sometimes a deacon or an elder, sometimes a youth leader. And many would assume when they approached me, "Are you the pastor of the church?" Which I never knew quite what to do with that because I never was. And by this time, I didn't want to be. I wasn't seeking to be a pastor. I thought that was in my rearview mirror, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had steered clear of professional ministry. My father passed away in 2008, and he had pastored a number of churches, rural churches in the central Kentucky area. And so by virtue of his good reputation, people knew him, and then they therefore knew me. And so I was actually called to do an interim position. Well, actually, before the interim position, I was called to just come and preach at a church where my father had pastored before. So I did that. They enjoyed it, and they asked me if I would consider coming on and being the interim while they looked for another pastor. Reluctantly, I consented to doing that. And then almost immediately they were just saying, "Why don't you just be our pastor?" Well, this is not something, again, that I had sought, and I wasn't seeking it now. So originally I said, "No, I'm not interested in doing that." But they were very persistent, and against my better judgment, I relented and decided to be their pastor. And it was a learning experience for me because I had not gone to seminary. I do have a bachelor's degree in Bible, but I'd never been a pastor. I grew up the son of one, though, and so I learned maybe in that schoolroom. And it ended up being a tremendous blessing for me because it was a church of about 40 to 50 people, most of them elderly, few children. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of that, what I needed to be doing with that. Could I grow a church like that? Could we evangelize in the neighborhood? Could we see young families come? And especially when there are other churches out there where families understand that they can go and take their kids, and there's really well-developed ministries for their children. But I saw the place for pastoral care, to answer your question, with these elderly people who, as it turns out, knew and loved hymns. Well, I knew hymns. I was raised with those. I know hundreds of them. They used the King James Version Bible, and even though that's not my preference, I can speak King James. And I found that it appeared to me that the Lord appointed me to a ministry of watching over many of these saints as they made their departure from this world. So I did, in the short span of 5.5 years of being a pastor there in that little country church, I think I did about 12 funerals of members of that church. And many of them were just stalwart, exemplars of the faith. And I found that the Lord had given me a real capacity to empathize with people in grief. And so there were many occasions afforded for me to be at bedsides, deathbeds, to be with grieving families around graves. And these are the times that are critical for families to be ministered to, with the promises of God. And so, of course, every pastor is also in charge of marrying as well as burying. And so I did some of that. Children did come to our church, and I found that delightful, so I always made sure a significant portion of the way that we did ministry was to include children and have things prepared especially for them. In fact, when I did my sermon preparation, the last thing I did was something that would then become on Sunday morning a children's minute, where I would take all of my exegetical work that I did in studying for that message and distill it down to something that any child could understand in 1 minute. And so that's what I would do every week. And the really thrilling part is that I think the adults liked it better even than better than the kids. They would always be hanging on every word. And then the kids themselves, like Art Linkletter pointed out, they say the darndest things.
Right.
And so many of the sweetest illustrations just came out of that interaction with children. So I did discover that I do have a great love to minister to people and do pastoral care at various stages of life, and teens and those who are in college and young marrieds and elderly people. Every station in life, presents unique challenges. And though I don't have all the answers, I just have really enjoyed coming alongside folks in any and all of those different phases and walking with them through it and seeing what the Lord God has to say to us and the promises that he gives us that enable us to endure and overcome in every phase of life.
And what age range were you when you started that church working?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I was in my 50s. I was 51.
Okay.
And I thought that was in my past. I thought that opportunity to be a pastor was gone because I was in my 20s, of course, when I graduated and was expecting to go on to seminary. So this is now 30 years later plus. And the Lord had other plans. And so we ended up doing that. And even my sons and my wife will say, even though it was a challenging thing, this is a little country church, they can't afford to pay you very much. And I didn't make much in the other things that I could do to make a living. So it was always really financially challenging, but it was really, really sweet. It was a family thing, and our sons were very much loved and ministered to by those elderly people and their families. And we all look back on it very, very fondly. And in fact, I'm still very blessed today because I'll see some of those folks, many of whom now are in their 80s, and they'll say that they wish that I was still back there, that they miss us as a family, and it's very gratifying to hear.
What did you do when you left there?
I did a number of things while there that would later find new application. One of the things I did there is I used drama. I do a drama of the Apostle Paul in chains. So I dress up in a costume where I look like an imprisoned prisoner in the first century, and I'm wearing chains. And then I dictate the book of Philippians. But I don't just dictate it, I act it. So that's actually had application now in I presented that presentation that I developed at that little country church in probably 20 to 25 different churches and locations in 3 states.
Okay.
And so what I did since then is I worked for a newspaper. I was a graphic designer for a newspaper in Berea, Kentucky. I'm a freelance graphic designer, so I've done a good bit of that. And I was doing that all along anyway, but I had to ramp up what I was doing. But then we were also praying about what's next, because when we left there, we weren't sure what was next. And so we were casting about for what was next. And we went out to dinner it was to ice cream one night with my sister in Berea, Kentucky at the Dairy Queen. And she asked us that night, well, if you could write your own ticket, what would it be? What would you do?
Great question.
Yeah, it really is a great question. And then she put it to me or to us like this. She said, if neither fear nor money were at issue, what would you do?
Even better question.
An even better question. And my wife and I looked at one another and looked back at her, and almost in unison, we said we would go to the Dominican Republic. Now, I need to explain. Why did we say that?
Yes, please do.
Years before, I should say, before Joyce and I were even married, or it might have been in the first year or two of our marriage, our little church that we attended did a missions conference. And we really sensed that the Lord at some point in our future would want us to go and do foreign mission. We wanted to be about doing that. But we didn't know anything about it. We didn't know any other language. We didn't have a particular burden for any particular place in the world. But over time, as we raised our children over these years, there were a number of occasions where we had occasion to listen to missionaries from the Dominican Republic and to learn data about the Dominican Republic. And every time, both she and I independently were just very moved by that, and it was compelling for us. And we always said to one another, if we could go somewhere, I think the Lord would have us go to the Dominican Republic. We heard just what a wonderful, warm culture it was, a front porch culture. And there were just many things about it that we loved, and the culture was very inviting to us. So we said we'd go to the Dominican Republic. So my sister said, well, why don't you start praying about that? And I'll pray with you and see what happens. So we did. And in fairly short order, I had been looking one day. I was looking about for maybe I could do graphic design at a church, maybe one of the larger churches. I could do some videography or things like that. And I saw a classified ad about the Dominican Republic. It leaped off the page to me as if it were underlined, and highlighted. And so I made contact with that email address. Turns out it was the executive director of Doulos Discovery School in Jarabacoa, the Dominican Republic. And we got to talking, really hit it off with the director. He suggested that we come down for a vision trip to see what they were all about down there. So we did. We had to raise support even to go on that vision trip. But we went down and came and saw the campus. And it's a pre-K 3 through 12th grade bilingual, dual-accredited, disciple-making school. And it's non-denominational. And we just loved the work they were doing, the beautiful campus that they worked on. And so we both came away from the experience of coming on that vision trip just feeling like, even though it was a little frightening, because it is the developing world and there's you're exposed to more microbes, more disease, you can't drink the water, and various other inconveniences. We both felt strongly that the Lord was calling us there. And it was inexplicable in many ways because of our age, because of we didn't speak Spanish, and yet...
you were in your mid-50s, right?
And I'm in my mid-50s, yes. And so we sold our house that we'd lived in for 25 years. We're now empty nesters. And so in the fall of 2016, we landed in Santiago, Dominican Republic, and then drove up into the mountains into Jarabacoa and commenced 3.5-year stint as missionaries. My wife was involved in missionary care and human resources. And initially, I started out as graphic designer and webmaster, but eventually became the chaplain. And that was my wheelhouse.
Okay.
And it was in that connection, working in that ministry, where I discovered that many of the various vocations that were disparate in my mind, that I had worked on over the course of my lifetime, found application. I'd been an illustrator, I'd been an artist, I'd played around with photography and websites, and I'd been a pastor, and all of those things came together in that position as chaplain. And the drama that I did, I would do more of that, and I found that what I did at Wollaston Church as pastor, I would create parodies, gospel parodies or versions of country songs or Disney tunes, and then I would make them gospel presentations. I could share a rap with you. I'm not sure if you'd want to hear it, but...
Sure. But before, I want to ask you another question before you do the rap, but I definitely want to hear it. For that, I'm sure we have one listener out there who is, like me, geographically challenged.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us exactly where the Dominican Republic is on the globe.
Yes, the Dominican Republic is on the island of Hispaniola. It's to the southeast of Cuba, and it shares that continent or that island with Haiti. So many of you will know where Haiti is.
Okay.
It's on the west side of Hispaniola, and the Dominican Republic is on the east side.
Great. That's what I just wanted to. I know we've got someone out there that's wondering.
Yes.
So, but if you would do that rap, I'd love to hear
Yes.
that.
Well, I'll give you a little bit of the background as to why I did this particular rap. Before we left to the Dominican Republic, and we were coming to grips with the cost of discipleship, the cost of following Jesus in this way, it began to be really hard to understand. Oh, this house we've lived in for 25 years, we're leaving it. We're selling what we own because we can't keep that there. Mm-hmm. And as we counted the costs of that and worked through all the individual decisions, which were many, to make that transition, it was both painful to me, but also exciting, because sometimes we, like the songwriter said, we can't imagine the freedom we find from the things we leave behind. Because very often we are very addicted to a particular place and our stuff, and sometimes to be extricated from that can be very liberating, and we discovered that too. But as we were going through that maelstrom of various emotions, one night I was in a church, and the pastor had referred to Jesus's parable where Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. That when a man finds it, in his joy now, he goes and he sells everything that he has, everything, that he can buy that field and have that treasure. It's a simple and very brief parable, but it resonated with me because I thought, Lord, is that me? Has my life ever looked like that? Does it look like that now? But I found comfort in it that the way that Jesus describes really come into contact with the value of the kingdom of heaven is that person realizes, I would be giving up nothing to give up everything to have this. And so that became something that was such a life verse for me that I resonated with it and I meditated on it deeply. And it eventually became teaching material as a chaplain there. So I taught at multiple installment lessons on the subject. And in the due course of that, I think as I finished that, I delivered to them this rap. And it goes like this. One day I was out walking through a field, you see, and there was nobody around me who was looking at me. Well, I tripped on a rock and I hit the ground, rode over in the grass, and this is what I found. I found a hole in the ground where the rock used to be, and something glittered in the earth right in front of me. Well, I dug in and I scraped it and I brushed off dirt. Yeah, I got some sweaty armpits and a grimy shirt. And reaching down in the hole right there on my knees, I got my hands on something that you won't believe. I pulled out silver, gold, and jewels by the score, and under all of that, there was a whole lot more. My eyes grew wide with wonder and my mouth was dry. My heart was beating fast. You know the reason why. I'd found a fortune. It was mine. I could start anew. But there was something real important that I had to do. If I was digging in a field that was not my own, the owner wouldn't like it. Make my secret known. The law would come around and they'd make me pay. They'd take my treasure and my shovel and myself away. I had to buy that land. I had to make this mine. I'd really stop at nothing for a prize this fine. I sold my land, my house, my car, my big TV, my microwave oven, and my SUV. People laughed and pointed and they ranted and raved, but I just kept on working hard and scrimped and saved. They said I was a fool to live the way I do. But I knew something that they didn't. Now you know it too. What looked like loss to many others was a gain to me, because I was working for a purpose that they could not see. Because at last I got the money and I bought that place, and now I'm digging up the treasure with a smiling face. I found a fortune in a field. Have you found it too? All it costs is all you got for riches you can't lose. They may laugh at loving Jesus, scorn you to your face, but you'll be digging up the treasure of amazing grace.
Wow. Wow. So did that come to you in the night, or what was the creative process to write that?
That's a good question, because the creative muse is somewhat akin to the one that's operative in my visual arts as well. Mm-hmm. Because you have, with your visual arts, you have a blank piece of paper. You have a blank canvas. What is it? What's the mechanism that gets paint applied or pigment applied to that space. And there's something really rather mysterious about it. I love the idea that inspiration, kind of the very word itself, has the spirit within it, inspire. That genius itself has within it the genie, the spirit. And I really believe myself that all true inspiration comes from God. We don't have anything that we have that we didn't receive from God. And so how much more those things, I've heard so many times that recording artists, for instance, will say, I think Elton John said that one of his great songs, that he wrote it in 10 minutes. Or another one will say, I wrote it in the shower, as if it were taking dictation. And I would attest to that very often when the creative muse hits, I really feel like it's not of me. I feel like there's something going on that's extra cerebral.
Yeah.
Because it's like it just clicks, and I'll begin to write down ideas. Now, it doesn't necessarily come in the flow that you just heard, but I start to think of ways of phrasing and turning phrases to say what is on my heart, what's on my mind. And again, I think all of my creative processes go similarly, where I'm sort of following the muse. And then I end up having a few permutations of that before it gets to its final stage.
Okay. Well, let's transition from there into what I see as our main topic today, which is autism, and your son, Josiah, and the creative endeavor that you so successfully recently underwent, which was writing the book, Skacky, Adventures in Imagination.
Yes.
So let's start out with you telling us about autism. Assume we really don't know what it is, or we don't know the details, and how is it defined? How is it diagnosed? Is it known what causes it? Whatever you would like to inform us about.
Yes. Well, I'm not a clinician, and I can't really answer that in a scientific manner necessarily. And in fact, what I'll go ahead and say is what happened with us with autism was that we were blindsided by it, in that our youngest son was born in 1996. And by the time he was 4 and 5 years old, we began to notice that he was not like his brothers before him. He was very, very quiet, almost nonverbal, that he was very solitary. He stayed almost completely to himself. He didn't have friends, and he didn't seem to need friends. And then as he began to go to school, we heard back from teachers that there were some developmental delays. There were some social challenges he was unable to navigate very well, in that he had some quirkiness that was that some of the children could be cruel with. And so we knew that something was happening, but we didn't know what. So we took him to Cincinnati Children's, I believe it was 2002 or 3, and he was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, what they then called Asperger's syndrome. So we had now a diagnosis, right? It's called autism. This is what your son has. But we were probably like most any family who were given such a diagnosis and prognosis, because people would ask us, for instance, questions like, what's going to become of Josiah? Because they could see the clear differences in him and the challenges he faced. And we didn't know how to answer that question, because our very own son was an enigma to us, being as silent as he was, as solitary as he was. It's hard to get information out of him. It's hard to understand maybe where all this is heading. He didn't require any medication, but he did require special consideration at school, and so he got that. What I understand it is, of course, is the condition of the brain, where they process things differently. I don't want to say it's necessarily dysfunctional, but certainly differently enough that it's noticeable. They can have some developmental delays, but then you can also discover later that they have an enormous capacity in other areas. For instance, memorizing things, or being able to do mathematics, or it's a mysterious condition. And so how to define it very clearly or succinctly, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to do that. Mm-hmm. But what we did see with Josiah, as he played with his toys in particular, he found a little toy, a little stuffed animal in a box in the back of a closet. How long it had been in our house, we can only guess. It may have been up to 15 years because his oldest brother is 12 years older than him. It had no tag on it, and it's a little green dinosaur-looking thing. I don't even really know what it is, but for whatever reason, Josiah really liked it. And as they say in the mountains, he glommed onto it, and they became inseparable. And as he played in particular with this one stuffed toy, but then created also around him a community of other stuffed toys, like any child would do, and then gave them their distinct names, personalities, and ways of engaging one another, we saw, in ways we didn't see heretofore, we saw his creativity, we saw his compassion, we saw his wry sense of humor, we saw his intelligence. And so it opened a window for us to understand our mysterious child, and it opened a window to understand a little bit autism itself. So that revelatory process was so inspiring and wonderful for me that I began to record some of it in photographs I would take of him with his toys. I started to jot out some ideas for how this could be a little story, and I thought, hey, maybe this would be a great children's book someday. But for the most part, over the years, it remained only a prospect. Mm-hmm. When we went off to the Dominican Republic, those initial drawings, of which I'd only done 4 or 5, and the notes that I'd made were just in a box in storage. When we got back from the Dominican Republic and we started to tour the United States, and we landed in Southern California, and then eventually came back to Kentucky and got those things out of storage, well, the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. And like so many people will tell their story, that the pandemic ended up being something that really was like a hinge that turned their lives. And I would say I was no exception in that sense, because now we found ourselves almost feeling incarcerated in our apartment. And so I got those drawings and those notes out of storage, and I began to think about, this is the time for me to finish this. So I did. Within about a month's time, I finished all the drawings. I finalized the text for it, and then because of my experience in doing pre-media, pre-press, I created the book. And then I started to shop it around. I'd never done this before. Like so many other things in my life, I'd never done it before. So I tried to shop it around to some agents in New York City. And I was out of my league, I think, in trying to do that. And initially I was frustrated and a little discouraged, thinking maybe it wasn't good enough to be published. And I thought, well, perhaps I could just go to some online resource and just publish it for myself, because that's all I really cared about doing anyways, to having a book that I could read to my grandchildren. But eventually I heard about Acclaim Press in Missouri, and I passed my document to them. They really loved it. They took it on. And so long story short, we did have it published, and we premiered it at McLeod's Coffee House in late August. And it was a perfect place, and we may get to that as to why it was perfect.
Sure.
But it was the culmination of more than 20 years of development, to get to that point. And so it goes to show me, and maybe to you too, that, don't let a dream die necessarily. You can dust it off. You can dust it off and make it a reality. And so it's been great because Josiah, even though we said, or as I said earlier, we didn't want him to feel stigmatized. We didn't want him to feel that he was an oddity. I did ask him at one point, how do you feel about me publishing this book? And because I had some apprehension that he might feel stigmatized, that he might feel somewhat embarrassed by that. But he couldn't have been more excited about it. He invited all of his friends to come to the premiere. He also sat alongside me on the evening of the premiere and signed the books alongside me. So we thought that was entirely appropriate since it was his story to do that. So it's been a wonderful blessing to have Skacky Adventures in Imagination, and I can speak a little bit to the title.
Yes,
Skacky is the name he gave. That I don't know why he chose Skacky, but we subtitled it Adventures in Imagination because it was the lucidity and the beauty of Josiah's imagination that was given form in the expressions that he used in playing with those toys. And that word imagination is powerful to me because I would say that we never imagined we would never imagine that we would have had a child with these kinds of particular special needs. And then when we had him and people would ask what's going to become of him, we couldn't really imagine what we didn't know how to answer that question. And then we saw him using his imagination with his favorite toy. And then I realized that I could use my imagination with my favorite toys, which my favorite toys were always coloring crayons and paint brushes and pencils. And we can create whole worlds with these things. Mm-hmm. And so it's an adventure of creative imagination. And really, it's kind of a metaphor, maybe, I think, for life itself, that we all have that power within each of us to take our own imaginations and expand upon that. Mm-hmm. And there's no telling what can be created when we give ourselves to a vision of seeing that accomplished.
That's inspiring. I think a lot of illustrated book authors write the material, but then they have someone else illustrate it. You were able to do absolutely everything except the publishing part of it, right?
Yeah. And then the culminating use of the term imagination is ultimately the effect can be really beyond our imaginations. Mm-hmm. I love the scripture that says that He is God, that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond what we ask or can even imagine. Mm-hmm. And I find that to be a mind-blowing promise that typically we think too small. We limit ourselves with what we think is possible. But in the hands of Almighty God, to whom all things are possible, then the imagination isn't even the limit. Mm-hmm. Because we're not able to think God's thoughts, which are so much higher above our own as the heavens are above the earth.
Right. Great. Well, so you had the book signing at McLeod's Coffee House, and I learned about you from Brewster McLeod, the owner of McLeod's Coffee House. How did you become associated with Brewster and with McLeod's? And that's another thing I've not actually asked you is, you were talking about your church experiences early, throughout your life. Where do you go to church now?
We go to Southland.
Okay, you are at Southland. So I hadn't actually asked you that and didn't know that. So I assume then that's where you met Brewster, of course.
Well, actually, I didn't, strangely enough. One of the things that our publisher required, because they're a small outfit, is that they really want us to get a corporate sponsor who kind of has a shared interest in the book becoming a reality, who would then profit themselves from the books being published. And then that helps with the startup costs for marketing and promoting the book. And, I didn't have any money. And we were in the conditions of the pandemic where I'm not a marketer and I'm not a salesman. And I'm not able to go and sit across the desk from someone and ask them, hey, would you like to read my book and possibly be my corporate sponsor. And so I floundered with that for many months because I couldn't connect with anyone and land the deal, to get someone to do that. So one day, I think it was a Sunday afternoon, I was looking on Facebook, on social media, and I saw one of my young friends had posted photographs from his church that morning, and he was all excited because their church was starting a new ministry to special needs families, special needs adults and children. And that's a unique thing for a church to take on. And the fact that he was interested in that was intriguing to me. And so I sent him a direct message, and I said, hey, I've got a book, that features my own son and his special needs and what we learned about autism through his play. And it's just an easy read, children's book. And I'm wondering if you'd like to, or if your church might be interested in partnering with me to see this book get published. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, here, I'll give you their contact information. If they're not interested, I might be. So I did check with that church, and they were in the incipient stages of their planning, and so they weren't really ready to make any kind of major move. So I came back to my young friend, and I said, yeah, they're not ready to move on that now. So would you like to hear about it? So we met for coffee, Purdy's Coffee Shop in Richmond, Kentucky. And I brought the book, and he loved it. It was a PDF version that he read. And he and his wife were expecting their first child, and he is a financial advisor, and he was just getting ready to rebrand his business, in particular to help families who need to do long-term financial planning for their special needs adult children. The reason that he was inspired to do that is that he has an older brother who had head trauma, a brain injury from an automobile accident when he was just out of high school. And he's extremely limited mobility. He lives with his parents and will for the rest of his life. And so my friend had a special place in his heart for struggling adults with whatever the cause of their struggles. And so he is successful enough in what he's done that he said, yes, I will be I'll partner with you on that. So one of the things that we had to choose to do is, where are we going to premiere the book? And I didn't have a brick and mortar store, or neither did he. He was just he has a small location in Richmond, Kentucky. So he suggested to me, where we ought to do it is at McLeod's Coffee House. And I said, oh. He always said, you haven't heard of McLeod's? I said, no. And he said, so you don't know Brewster McLeod? And I said, no, I don't know him. And so he informed me that Brewster was a former youth pastor for many years in Southland churches. And he had done a lot of work with special needs families. And in fact, it was his idea to come up with what they now call Jesus, what's it called?
Jesus Prom.
Jesus Prom, yes, that's right. And that was Brewster's idea. And so every year, that's a big bash, that all these special needs individuals, they all get dates, and they all come in fancy rides, and they dress up, and they come, and there's dancing and music and food, and the spotlight is on them. And there's existing ministry every week. They have their own Sunday school class there. I went there 3 weeks ago, I think it was, and they had a talent show. It's a beautiful thing. And so a lot of that is because of Brewster McLeod's inspiration. So he said, let's go over and meet with Brewster and ask him about possibly debuting the book in his space. And so I said, sure. We went over there and did that. It was hard to get him, but so we just showed up. We couldn't call him in advance. And he was sitting around at various tables, chatting it up with so many different people. And we came in and just sat and waited. And very shortly, he made his way over to us, and he sat at our table. And my young friend told him what we were there for. And then we brought the book out, and we were talking about it. And within, I don't think, 2 minutes, Brewster was saying, you know what? You should premiere the book here.
Nice.
So we didn't even have to ask him.
Yeah.
And so he was gracious all along. He waived any fees that he would normally have charged for the use of the space. He helped promote the event. The three of us together planned the event, and I couldn't be more proud to be in association with both of those fellas.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, I saw the fingerprints of God all over this. There were all those months where I was about ready to give up and just throw in the towel, and all of a sudden, everything's clicking, and it's clicking perfectly well with just the right people and just the right time, and that's the way God works. And so now I can proudly say that Brewster McLeod is one of my better friends. I really love and respect him, and then also, of course, Nick Wallace. I didn't mention him by name, but he was my financial supporter, and he's taken the book. This is to his great credit. He could have made money from the book on the premiere because he invested in the first, I don't know, few hundred books. And he would have had the opportunity at the premiere to sell those books, but he gave them away.
Oh.
So most of the people who came to our premiere over a 3-day period were given free books.
Okay.
Because of his largesse.
Nice. Wow. Well, we'll have a link to his business
Yes.
in the show notes for the podcast. So Josiah did go with you, and you say sat with you at McLeod's, and
he did
signed the books and so on.
Yes.
Wow. Now, what age was Josiah when he first started playing with Skacky?
I think he was no more than 6. It's hard for me at this age in my life to remember things, if you can identify.
About that.
I think he was born in 96. I think it was around 2002 or 3 at the latest that he found Skacky. As you'll see when you read the book, he had a number of other special toys that he made a part of the family, named and gave personalities to. So
I've got 2 questions for you now, and just develop these however you would like. So tell us how old Josiah is now, and how has his life developed from age 6 through today. And then if there are some things that you would like to know, that you would like for someone who has just found out that they have a child who is diagnosed with autism, what advice, if they were sitting with us, what advice would you give them? What insights and so on? So again, how's Josiah's arc of his life gone? How old is he now? And then what advice would you give? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Well, Josiah, with the special consideration that he got in school, he was able to navigate it and graduate. He wasn't an outstanding student, but he wasn't. He was above average, I would even say, in his academic performance.
Great, above average. Wonderful.
I would say above average, because he has a voluminous, encyclopedic mind.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't forget anything. He may have trouble expressing it, but he's never had any trouble with mathematical principles.
Okay.
He's really uncanny, really, in those things. And so that's why I always say to people about autism, at least this is my experience of autism, is that what we may have thought going in, looking at someone's quirky, weird, emotional effect or whatever, is that they've got a liability. You might find, to your great surprise and delight, that they actually have a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be certainly our experience with our son. So he managed to graduate, and then he went off to Berea College, but he didn't know what to do. I guess a lot of us don't, when we come right out of high school. And it was a double whammy on him because his parents had just moved to the Dominican Republic.
Mm-hmm.
So though we'd lived there all his life, he no longer had mom and dad even around.
Mm-hmm.
His brothers had all grown up and moved out and weren't near. And so Josiah was sort of cast adrift, and we feel badly about that. And so his experience at Berea College academically was, I don't want to call it a disaster, but it was very nearly a disaster. His GPA was very poor, and he ended up dropping out in his first semester of his junior year. So he did have some challenges and some bumps in the road. And so But the years now have passed. He's now 26 years old. He came to live with us 2 years ago, and he started to go to school at BCTC here locally and tried to rebuild his GPA. He got on the dean's list at BCTC, and then he got his associate's degree. He transferred those credits to Eastern Kentucky University and is now finishing up a program in international studies.
Oh, nice.
He also went for a year and a half with us to the Dominican Republic. We thought that he would go in the capacity of like doing some work with maintenance crew or something, because when he went to Berea College, he had been on the maintenance crew on campus. So we thought that might be a good choice for him. But he was also given a second choice where he could work with academic interventions for students who were struggling with acquiring English and mathematics. He chose to do that route. And he found, to his delight and to our delight as we watched him, we have some video of him interacting with the kids, that he had a real gift for that. Wow. And he could connect with kids who were struggling because he was a kid who was struggling.
Yeah.
And some of the ones who were disciplinary challenges were sent to him, and he could deal with them. And so he got a passion there about foreign language and travel. And ironically, he told us when we went to the DR in the first place, well, you won't see me because he has flight anxiety. He said, I won't be coming. Well, he not only came, he practically had to take medication to be able to get on the plane. But he not only came, but he thrived in that setting. And I think he discovered a passion that he has, that of teaching and helping, children struggling as he struggled, and of acquiring language. And so he's finishing up that program at EKU in international studies. And we have high expectancy for what he'll end up doing. And so it's been a delight to see him sail like this. And in this connection, I would say that it'd probably be appropriate for me to mention what happened when he was graduating from high school. Because, again, Josiah at that juncture was still rather enigmatic to us. He was still like, good luck getting any information out of him. And, he would go out, for instance, and pace. He would pace outside for 2 hours around the mailbox and wear out the grass, or around the roots of the tree in the backyard until there was dirt there. And you could come out and say, Joe, what are you thinking? And he'd go, nothing.
At what age was that?
Well, that was through most of his developmental years, but all the way into high school.
Okay.
He did transition from pacing in high school to running. He would go out and run, walk and run. But he was still rather enigmatic to us in that you couldn't engage him into a conversation. You couldn't, for instance, ask him information, to disclose about what's going on in his heart and head. He just didn't really engage in that sort of thing. And so it was surprising to us that when he was a senior and my wife was working with the project graduation, and in that connection, she spoke to Josiah's senior English teacher. And she said, oh, have you seen Josiah's paper that he wrote? And she's like, no, I didn't know there was such a paper. Oh, you've got to read his paper, she said. You got to read his paper. It's just so good. And so she went and asked Josiah if she could read the paper. And he was not forthcoming with that initially. He didn't want to give it up. He didn't want to share that, but he did eventually give her the letter. She sat down, and it's not a letter. It was actually, the assignment was, who am I?
This is senior high school, senior paper.
Yeah, senior paper in English, to the theme, who am I?
Wow.
And she read that and she wept. And I could get emotional myself thinking about it. She passed it to me subsequently. I also wept. And it was a joy because what we saw was that Josiah was very comfortable with who he was. He didn't see himself as being in any way hampered by life. There was almost a cockiness about him, not a timidity of, I'm ready. And we saw that he had this great sense of humor. And amazingly, for a nonverbal child, we saw that he was quite articulate on the written page. This kid could write. And so it was so revelatory, and again, similar to what we saw with the Skacky process, that the creativity of his writing opened a window to see what we could not see otherwise in Josiah's life. So here he is now. He's 26 years old. He hopes to have a bachelor's degree this May from EKU, and he'll be the third of my sons who will have graduated from college.
Okay. And I understand that he loves to travel and that he has a little traveling companion that he likes to take pictures with.
Yes. For some reason, he does love to travel. He goes, and his travel could be as simple as jump in the car and drive to Hazard because he's never been to Hazard. Or it could be that he goes down into Tennessee, or maybe he goes up to Niagara Falls with his traveling buddy that he went to high school with. And his buddy, he knows that Josiah is quirky, and so he's a little quirky too. So both of them have rubber ducks. And, they're grown men, yes, I get it. And Josiah's rubber duck is a zebra rubber duck. Don't ask me why, I don't know. But he takes that little duck with him, and then he'll go and do selfies of him holding the rubber duck in front of the statue or the landmark, the local landmark, and he posts those to his social media. And he loves to do that. He wants to see the world. He's learning through online resources. He's learning 3 or 4 different languages now. He's done a little German, Russian, French, Spanish, and he wants to see the world, and it's just amazing how comfortable he is in his own skin, more than most people are, I think. And Joe's fine. He's doing fine.
Do you have some feel at this point as to what he might do with his degree, or is it probably just much too early?
He's trying to develop that himself. He's groping for all the details that fill that out, but he is interested in education. He may go ahead and try to work with teaching English as a second language and do something of what he was doing in the Dominican Republic, just helping with academic interventions with people struggling. He liked that. He really liked that, and he had a great facility for doing it. We have encouraged him to maybe consider that education major, maybe going to get a master's in education, so that that could be his ticket. If you want to see the world and you want to interact with people of different cultures, then you definitely need to have some skill sets that will help you make that a reality.
Hit the road with that duck, right?
Yeah.
I think he has a TikTok page too.
Yes, he surprised us. He's always been surprising. We learned, and he doesn't telegraph these things. He doesn't say, "Hey, Mom, Dad, I'm going to make a TikTok page." You find out after he's been doing it for a month that he made a TikTok page.
Yeah.
And his TikTok page is something on the order of how does he put it? Fun fact about every country in the world.
Yeah, and I've watched it, by the way.
Oh, have you?
I learned about it, and it is very, very entertaining and educational. I enjoy it.
Yeah, he used that quirkiness of his style.
Yeah.
His kind of wry sense of humor to point out some things, and maybe he'll just raise his eyebrows or just do it in his own inimitable way.
Yeah.
And it seems to be getting some traction because there are some of those posts that he's done about different countries that have upwards of 40,000 views at this point.
Yeah, he's very personable. The word I was looking for, he has great stage presence, I think.
He does.
There. So that's great. Well, what are some things, is there anything that you wish that more people understood about autism?
It's been my observation that we human beings don't need very many reasons to distance ourselves from one another. Whether it be race or creed or ethnicity, and limitation, physical limitation, mental limitation. And it isn't necessarily that people intend to be cruel, but very often we just don't know what to do with ourselves. We feel awkward around someone who's very different from us, and so we end up inadvertently recoiling. And I think this can happen with we see someone in a wheelchair, or someone who looks like they're Down syndrome. We feel pity for them. We feel pity for their parents. We don't quite know what to say, and we don't want to say the wrong thing, and so we steer clear. And we just assume maybe the worst about what their experience is and what may even be remotely possible for that individual. And I think that can be a mistake, because even with those profoundly affected individuals, whether it be from an accident or for Down syndrome, you will find that if you will invest the time to really get to know that person and love them for who they are, just for who they are, that you'll find beauties and wonders about what their capacities and their personalities as they emerge to you. And you'll find that maybe, again, what we said earlier, that what you thought was a malady and a liability in this person's life may not be so at all. God doesn't see things the way we see things. We distance ourselves by the differences we perceive. And, the least of these are really high on God's agenda. And he would have us to do the same. And so what I would like people to understand about people affected by autism or any such limitation is that, or perceived limitation, I should say, that what you may have thought was something that was a malady and a liability, actually, if you would take the time to get to know them, you'll see that they have beauties about their personality and powers that are amazing, really quite amazing. That's been our experience with Josiah and other special needs adults and children that we've met, and you just get to know them and love them, and you find that they're extraordinary. And I think that really we should have that attitude regardless, because we're all going to become the best version of ourselves in an environment of love. When we know that we're loved and accepted, it just opens up the throttle on what's possible for us to achieve and do. And we'd like to think that was the environment we provided for our son as he grew. And I think that that's true of any of us. Just whoever you're loving, just love them. Just love them and give them the very best opportunity to become the very best version of themselves. And they will.
I feel like I need to say, I think you were supposed to go to the Dominican Republic, even though he struggled a little bit at Berea after you went, because then he came down and found himself and found things that he is passionate about doing and that he's very, very good at, and it's changed his trajectory, I think. Is that
exactly so? You said it correctly.
Yeah.
That's and again, that's one of the fathomless mysteries of life, especially being led by God, is that there can be so many things that happen that we evaluate wrongly. It feels like we're evaluating it correctly because it feels that way.
Seems logical.
Right. Yeah. But of course, the Bible tells us, don't lean on your own understanding. It'll fail you. Just trust in the Lord, because he will take those things. He majors in that, those things that were meant for evil, and he turns them for good. Those things that seem to be hopeless, situations, that he turns around in a way that will wow you.
Yeah.
And that's a good example there. It's like, who would have thought the kid who told us right up front, I'm not coming, right, you won't see me there, and then goes off and doesn't do well in college, and we're thinking, oh, we're awful parents, and yet he would end up coming there. The kids loved him. We have a thing called bandera. It's the flag at the beginning where we come, and all the announcements are made in the amphitheater, and we have a Pledge of Allegiance, and we sing the national anthem they are a very patriotic country. And then, so Josiah got roped into telling jokes.
Oh.
He would tell jokes in that setting, and the kids just loved him. He had that dry sense of humor.
Yeah.
And so I can think of one that he said, he said, I can't even think now because, and I wouldn't be able to tell them in a way that is as amusing as he would. Oh yeah, so he told this joke. He said, that there's a guy that said, "Watch me disappear," and he said, "Uno, dos," and then he disappeared without a trace.
And I bet they did like it. That's good. Well, that's right. So, that is very good. Well, do you think that you might write another book?
I would really welcome the possibilities of doing that, either as a sequel and follow-up to what I think that there's another Skacky book. There could be. I mean, I could probably do a children's book or two just from the different things that Josiah has said that are hilarious. I mean, he's always had such a take on life that's, and I, if I could share one of the things that this in itself could be a cute little children's book. Every evening when we were putting our children to bed, we had a routine, and of course it involved brushing your teeth. It involved saying your prayers and getting tucked into bed. But we were raising 4 kids, and a lot of the multitasking was challenging for us many times. And so on this one particular night, he had been preparing on, I think, a Thursday night for a Friday morning spelling test. And so we were also going over his spelling words as we were trying to do all these other things. Well, one of the things that he developed doing as part of his quirkiness is that when he got into bed, he would wallow, he would go down to the foot of his bed under his covers. There'd be a lump down there at the foot of his bed. And he would come back up eventually, and he would always tell us he'd gone to China. This is his imagination. And he would say, and while I was there, and he would tell something, and you could tell he was free associating. He would just tell some story off the top of his head as what he experienced in China. And he would say, and while I was there, I learned this word in Chinese. And then he would say some nonsensical, string of syllables that he said was a Chinese word. And then he would define it. So this is the, so he was doing that's this night, and I'm exhausted. And I say, hey, we need to pray, Joe. And I hear this muffled sound from the foot of his bed. And he goes, I'm in China. And I said, yeah, I know you're in China. But, I said, look, I got one more spelling word. And I said, how do you spell beneficial? And he's like, he gave me some stab at an answer, and it wasn't even close. And I said, all right. I said, you need to come back. Well, I'm in China. And I said, no. He said, yeah, but I said, I know somehow amazingly you can hear me over the miles, and I need you to come back. So he comes wallowing back up, and he sticks his tousled head out from under the covers. And he goes, I went to China, as if I didn't know that already. And I said, yeah. And he goes, and I went to the zoo, and I saw the tigers and the elephants and the lions. And I went and I saw the giraffes, and the giraffe looked down. He leaned over. He looked at me really closely, and then he ate me. And his eyes you can see that he's making this up as he goes. And he chewed me up, and I went down through his esophagus. He used that word. And I passed through his stomach. And as I was passing through his small intestine, I heard a voice, and it said, how do you spell beneficial?
Oh, my.
I mean, it's like, where do you get this stuff?
That is creative. That is.
Yeah. And he would do that kind of thing all the time.
Yeah. I think I'm sure you can come up with another book. So speaking of the book, how can people buy the book?
Well, the book is available from Acclaim Press. You can go to acclaimpress.com. And it's also on Amazon, right? You can find it on Amazon. And then I have it on my own site. I have a site called skylightoriginals.com. And when you order from my site, I throw a little swag in there. I throw some extras in there, some stickers and some bookmarks and further explanation of the story behind the story. So that's at skylightoriginals.com.
Well, as we conclude, is there anything else that you would like to talk about or that I have just failed to bring up?
No, I think you've been very thorough, and I appreciate your questions.
Good. Well, I appreciate our newfound friendship, which I'm going to make sure continues. So this is the Bluegrass Region Highlights segment, where I ask these 2 questions. What's your favorite coffee shop or restaurant in the Bluegrass State? It doesn't have to be Fayette County, anywhere in the state. So maybe that would be a place that you like to go and hang out, or maybe it's a place that you would take an out-of-town guest to show off our local culture. That's question one. And the second, what's a favorite venue or activity that you like to visit or do here in the Bluegrass region, or take a guest to?
Yeah. Well, one place that we discovered a couple of years ago I think it's called the Native Cafe.
I love it.
We really love that place.
Yeah.
The ambiance there is unsurpassed.
Maxwell Street.
Yes, it's more plant-based, but it's just gorgeous there and relaxing, and the food is very, very good. We like to go there. And there are a number of wonderful coffee shops all around town. I mean, I would hate to even signal one out as above the others, except maybe McLeod's Coffee House,
Right.
because you'll never find one as unique as that place. And so we do love that. We would like to consider ourselves foodies, although I'm not sure we can really afford to be foodies on a high level. But we like the farm-to-table kinds of experiences, and there are a number of those around as well. We love agave and rye downtown. I would say I have a date with my wife. On the 6th, we're going to go to the Opera House, which is a great attraction. We're going to go see a Postmodern Jukebox.
Yeah, they're great. I see them online. I love that. Yeah.
So we're going to go and do that. And we live close to the Legacy Trail, so my wife and I like to bike. And so we go and do that, and there's a coffee shop along the way downtown when you head back into town. And then you can go out of town and go all the way out to the horse park. That's an attraction for us. It wouldn't be for some, but we really love that. And so we love living in Lexington. It's a beautiful town. It has all the amenities of any larger city without some of the downfall of the pollution and overcrowdedness and that you get in some of the other big cities. So we're loving living in Lexington.
Well, great. Well, Timothy, thank you so much for being on Bluegrass Region Voices and Views. And as I referred to, I hope that we've created a newfound friendship and that we'll find some other opportunities to find ways to make a positive difference for others in our community here.
Amen to that. I can assure you that you have found a friend in me.
Very good. Thank you so much. I'm thankful that Brewster McLeod connected Tim and me. If you order Tim's book from Skylight Originals, you'll get a signed copy and other swag. One of them is entitled, "What's This All About? The Deeper Stuff," which goes into detail about the meaning of the book. I love the insight it gives into what Timothy was thinking about with each illustration. Go to his website at skylightoriginals.com. Show notes, pictures, and related links are on my website at bluegrassregionvoicesandviews.com. Thanks for listening.